Pontius Pilate spoke for all of us when he said, "What is truth?" That's a question that philosophers have been teasing their minds with for centuries. It's the same question as asking, what is real? Is this desk real? Am I real? Or do I just think I'm here? Do I think this is here? What is real? What is true? That is, of course, the question we've got to ask about religion. One religion claims there is only one God. Another religion says there are 30 million gods. Another religion says there are no gods at all. Christianity says there are 3 persons in one God, which is different from all the others. The real question is not what we believe, but is it true? You can be sincerely wrong. It does matter what you believe. And Pilate had this same skepticism that many people today have. What is truth? How do we know? How do we find out? Who knows? How can you know? Actually, the answer to his question was standing 6 feet in front of him. Because Jesus said, "I am the truth." That is an extraordinary claim. And again, I want to show you why that claim is so unacceptable today. I want you to realize how difficult it is to believe that Christ is unique in the 20th century Western world. I've got to introduce you to 3 more isms. After this talk, we're finished with them. That will be a relief to you. But here are 3 important isms we've got to learn about. Number 1, rationalism. Until 300 years ago, in Europe at any rate, if you asked a person what is truth, they would have a simple answer. Truth is what God tells us. And if you asked, well, how does God tell us? They would probably have answered through the church or through the Bible. The great shift that took place at the time of the Reformation was that people began to question whether what the church said was what God was saying, and turned instead to what the Bible said. But at least they had this in common, both Catholics and Protestants at that time. The truth was what God said. If God said something, that was true, that was real. You didn't argue about it. You could either accept or reject it, but that's how truth came. It was revealed from God's mind to human beings, and you didn't argue about that. But then came a great shift in human thinking about 300 years ago. We call it the Enlightenment. I'm not sure that it wasn't a step into the dark, actually, but the switch was this. Truth is no longer what God tells us, but what we find out for ourselves. To put it simply, human reason replaced divine revelation. You no longer accepted unquestionably what the church or the Bible taught. You thought it through for yourself. You used your own common sense. Truth was what I think. That is the heart of rationalism. It made man self-sufficient. He could discover truth for himself. He didn't need God to help him. Man could discover it with the use of his own mind, through his own senses, which of course opened the whole field for scientific discovery. It's interesting that most of the scientists who laid the foundation of modern science still believed in God. People like Galileo, Isaac Newton, Bacon, Copernicus, all of them believed that they were thinking God's thoughts after him, but they were discovering them for themselves. And that eventually led to a new philosophy we call deism. There's another ism for you, which believes that God created the world but no longer controls it, that the world is like a watch that somebody has wound up and must go on its own way now and can't be altered. It operates according to its own laws. So while still believing in God, many of these scientists believed that God himself could not change the order of nature. And so they gave their minds to discover the laws of nature and became rather proud of their discovery, and then their manipulation of nature, because all science discovers how nature operates so that we may change how it operates by using the laws of nature to manipulate nature itself. So by unaided reason, we became the people in charge of our universe. In other words, the authority of human reason took over from the authority of divine revelation. And this introduced an age of skepticism, which is still with us. People no longer believe a thing just because they are told. They want to find out for themselves whether it is true, whether it appeals to their logic, whether they can understand it. But it's tragic when man will only believe what he understands or what he can discover for himself, because we shall never fully understand God, nor can we discover God. There is no telescope or microscope that can examine him. In fact, what happens as the result of rationalism is that we become obsessed with creation rather than the Creator, because science can tell you nothing about the Creator. It can only tell you about the creation, which has lowered our vision from heaven to earth. It has brought us down to the material world in which we live. That was the first great shift 300 years ago, from divine revelation, God says it, so it must be true, to human reason. I can't understand it, so it can't be true. Or you've got to explain it to me before I'll believe it's true. Now that produced the cold, clinical intellectualism of science. And there has also been a reaction against that into the warmth of a movement we call Romanticism, which said human beings are not only thinking creatures, but feeling creatures, and reality needs to be felt. What is true is what I feel to be true. And so there came not just a desire for a scientific explanation of things, but a desire for an experience of things, which really came to a head with the existentialist movement of our day, in which people want to feel something. They don't feel it's real unless they felt it. That is even the test some people apply to worship. It hasn't been good worship because I didn't feel anything. That's very typical of the romanticism that has now flooded our Western society. So you had the cold, clinical rationalism, which led to the field of science, and we have the romanticism, which led more into the field of arts, into the field of painting, music. And these were to help us to feel reality. So again, people looked at the world around us and wanted to feel it. Much music has been inspired by nature. We need to feel the music. And music essentially touches us at an emotional rather than an intellectual level. If you can't understand modern art, you've understood it. Because what it is saying is, the world doesn't make sense. I look at it, and it's crazy. It's a nonsense. So if you don't understand modern art or music, you do understand it, because they are saying you can't understand it. They're saying life is a riddle, it's absurd, it's a joke. But I can feel it. So we have these two very human and subjective approaches to the question, what is truth? Rationalism says truth is what my mind can explain. Romanticism says truth is what my heart can experience. And Jesus said, I am the truth, which contradicts both of those. Because if Jesus is the truth, then truth is not inside us. It's outside us, it's in him. Whereas rationalism said the truth is inside your mind. And romanticism says the truth is inside your heart. And so we have the scientist who explores outer space, and we have the artist who explores inner space. But they're both looking for reality, for truth. What is for real? Now, if you add together rationalism and romanticism, you come up with the real ism I wanted to talk to you about, relativism. And that is the mood of our era. In simple terms, The mood of our day is that truth is relative. It is not absolute. In simple terms, you can't be sure. You can hold an opinion, but you mustn't ever say to someone, I know the truth. You must say, this is my idea of the truth. This is my opinion. This is my understanding. This is my feeling. But then you must recognize that somebody else thinks differently and feels differently. So truth for them is different to truth for you. And all things become relative. In such an atmosphere, it is offensive to be dogmatic. To say, I know, is now offensive. To say, I think or I feel, that's okay. But to say, I know, who do you think you are? You are only saying what you think and feel. Truth is relative. I think and feel differently. And we shall only arrive at the whole truth by pooling all our different insights and aspects of the truth. That we've all got a little bit of the truth. And we need to bring it all together into one big truth, and then we might get somewhere near the truth. That's relativism. In other words, in a relativistic atmosphere in which we have to witness to Jesus Christ today, there is no such division as true and false or right and wrong. All is relative. Nothing is black and white, everything is gray. Therefore, you must never say that is wrong. Let's take an example. Islam says that God is not a father. Islam has 99 names for God, but Father is not one of them. Nor is love, interestingly enough. And the reason they say he must not be called Father is, as the Quran states, that God has no son. Yet we are here because we believe that God is a father, because he has a son. Now, in an absolute age, one of those must be true and the other false. But in a relativist age, you can say they're both true. They're both aspects of truth. That's how Christians see truth, that's how Muslims see truth. But the real question is, which is true? What is truth? So a relativist age does not like people who say this is wrong. A relativist age says everybody's right, which of course again keeps the peace. But it means that any clear, strong preaching, this is right and that is wrong, is unacceptable in modern thinking. Therefore, the Bible is being questioned as a source of absolute truth. It is now being regarded as a record of relative truth. And the favorite phrase I keep reading today is this: the Bible is culturally conditioned. Now, what is meant by that phrase? It means it's a reliable record of how the people in that day and at that time and in that situation understood truth. But it is not necessarily truth for us today, because we live 2,000 years later and 2,000 miles away in a technological society. Therefore, we can study the Bible for relative truth and study it. It is a reliable record of what they believed then, but it is not a reliable guide to absolute truth today. It is culturally conditioned. Jesus himself was a child of his time. That is what he sincerely believed. That is what he honestly thought was true. But we can rethink in our new situation truth for us in the light of truth for him. Are you getting the picture? The serious side of this lack of true and false in belief is the lack of right and wrong in behavior. And you must have noticed that no longer are there clear moral guidelines. Let me take an example. There's a well-known bishop, whom I needn't name because you know, who was on television answering questions from school children. And one of the children, a boy of about 10 years of age, said, "Bishop, is it all right to have sex before marriage?" And the bishop answered something like this. He said, "Well, it would depend on the circumstances. If it was sheer promiscuity, then that would be wrong. But if a couple intend to get married and love each other and really want to be committed to each other, then that's a different situation." In other words, it's now relative. There is no black and white. Fornication is relative. There are different types of it, and it depends on the circumstances whether it is right and wrong. And then he noticed that it was a little boy of 10 who'd asked this, and he said to the boy, "Why did you ask?" And the boy said, "Well, you don't believe in the virgin birth, so if Jesus was not born of a virgin, then Joseph and Mary must have had sex before marriage, so it's all right." It was the first time he'd realized the implications of what he'd been saying for some years. And he looked a bit shattered and then said something like this. He said, "Well, the Lord is able even to use our sin to glorify his name." In other words, he was saying Jesus was born of fornication, which is what many believe in our world today. But you see, the whole thing had become relative. Because he could no longer accept the Bible statement of the virgin birth as absolute truth, he was now caught up in a relative view of ethics and behavior. It's technically called situational ethics. You don't say to someone it's wrong to steal. There is a question to be asked first. Why are you stealing? What is the situation? There's no longer a clear line, don't lie. There are now 3 sorts of lie: black, white, and statistics. And it was an ancestor of mine who invented the word statistics, for which may he be forgiven. But my grandfather was preaching in Manchester at the turn of the century, and he said, "There are black lies and white lies." And a Yorkshire voice in the crowd shouted out, "Nay, lad, they're all black uns." But that's an absolute statement. It's all right to steal from the company, but stealing from your workmate is wrong. Why? Have you got the message? We live in a relative age. Truth is no longer absolute, so morals are no longer absolute. There is no such thing as true and false, so there is no such thing now as right and wrong. Everything shades off. And indeed, it means that we can be pretty subjective. We can decide what's true and false. We can decide what's right and wrong. We can eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. We can make the decisions. That's the relativist atmosphere in which we preach the uniqueness of Christ, that he is the truth. We're not saying he told the truth, or even that he had the truth. We're saying he is the truth, which means that it is by him that you can judge everything else. It is by him that you can know whether somebody is speaking truth or falsehood. It's by him that you can know whether a person is real or unreal. He is the truth. But in an age in which rationalism and romanticism has produced this relativism of what I think and feel and what you think and feel, it's all true. Everybody's got some little insight. Nobody has the truth. Well, certainly as a Christian, I would not want to make what sounds like an arrogant statement, I have the truth, but what I would say is the truth has me. That's different. We do not say what we say because we believe we have the truth, but because the truth got hold of us when a person got hold of us. In a relativist age, taste and trends replace truth. And you follow the crowd. You become a chameleon. You know what a chameleon is, don't you? A chameleon, if you put it on red, it turns red. If you put it on blue, it turns blue. I'm told the way to kill a chameleon is to put it on tartan, and it bursts. I've never tried it, but so I'm told. But if we're not careful, what we're doing is we are picking up the fashion of thinking from our TV, radio, newspapers, magazines, and we're following trends in thought. And trends are changing so rapidly these days that they reckon no fashion lasts longer than 4 years. So we're going to be a bunch of chameleons unless we find the truth and stay with it. And Jesus said, that's what I am. If you find me, you've found the truth. But that is terribly offensive. Now we're going to go a little further. Jesus not only said, I am the way and the truth, he also said, I am the life. And my problem now was how many isms to include. I could have put 30 or 40. We're talking about these isms as outlooks and attitudes that capture people's lives, that give them a purpose for living. Because one of the biggest questions in life is, what is life all about? Why am I here? I've only got one chance to make the most of this life. What can I give my life to? What can be the direction or goal or purpose of my life to make the most of it? Otherwise, life is like a roundabout. You get on, you go round and round, you have a great time while you're on, but you get off exactly where you got on. And you've lost your money. So what is life all about? What could I most purposefully do with the 70 years that I've got? And here we are being bombarded with a whole lot of isms that are saying, give your life to this. This is what life is all about. And I just run through a few of them that once you have labeled them, you will recognize them while you're watching the goggle box. Now let's look at the first, hedonism. That says that the purpose of life is the pursuit of pleasure. The main goal of life is to be happy. And many people believe this. And this is the goal of their life. This is the life for them. Anything that will bring them pleasure, whether it's a trip on marijuana or a trip to Mallorca, doesn't matter. Trouble with all these trips is you have to come back again. But hedonism is one of the most widespread philosophies of our day. And of course, there are two things you need for that. Number one, health. Number two, wealth. Those are the two things you need to be happy. So you must pursue those two things with all you've got. That's why you can go to so many health shops today and pay 3 times the amount for a loaf of bread. To be healthy. We become terribly conscious of health. I remember going to the Gold Coast in Australia and seeing retired people in their 70s and even 80s jogging up and down the beach every morning in the sun. And I looked at them and I thought, why? Why are they doing this? They're doing it because health is happiness. Hang on to your health as long as you can. But why? What is the purpose? Well, to be happy as long as ever you can. And of course, it also requires, as well as health and wealth, it requires time. And since our time, most of it is out of our hands, either sleeping or working, it means we need leisure. And we must have more and more leisure in order to live, in order to enjoy ourselves. That's one ism. A second ism is existentialism. And basically this philosophy says, if you want to live, you must be in charge of your life. You must make the decisions. Whatever decision it is, at least you made it. You were king in your own life. And you decided how you were going to live and where you were going to live. I suppose a song that sums this up more than any other was Frank Sinatra's hit, I Did It My Way. And it touched a chord around the world. People who felt within their own little sphere, they'd made decisions, they'd moved house, they'd been in charge of their own life, and somehow that was satisfying. The ultimate decision, of course, to make for yourself is to die. I mean to commit suicide. And there have been many, many suicides come out of this philosophy. That is the last thing I can decide to do. I did it my way. I cut my own throat. I did it my way. I was in Berlin once and heard Cliff Richard sing his own version of that song. Can't remember the words. He's forbidden by copyright to sing it here, apparently, but I wish he could. It was called I Did It His Way. And he changed all the words. And you could see the fulfillment in his face as he sang it. But existentialism says the purpose of your life is to make your own decisions, steer your own course, even if it means taking your own life, but do it your way. A third ism is conservationism. I've already touched on this in the earlier talk, but this is becoming a cause for which people are going to devote their lives to saving the whale. I remember seeing a procession of women in another country protesting about the slaughter of baby seals. They had their banners, protect the baby seals. And I know that some of them had aborted their own babies. What a crazy world we live in. Save the seals, but destroy our own. What a scale of values. But the whole environment question is becoming an obsession. And I can understand it because Christians are the only people who know that this planet Earth is not the only one there's going to be. Therefore, we do not panic, though we are concerned. But we know there is going to be a new Earth. But those who don't know that, who think this is the only Earth we'll ever have, feel that the greatest cause to which you can devote your life is to preserve the environment, to save the endangered species, to stop the greenhouse effect. That's worth giving your life to. The ark, said one such person, the ark is now the earth itself. Then there is humanitarianism, the welfare of the deprived. According to this, Bob Geldof could be more fulfilled than Billy Graham. And there are those who devote their lives to the underprivileged and the exploited, the liberation of the oppressed, that here is a cause worth giving your life to give you the purpose and direction that will help you reach the end of it with satisfaction. The Eurovision song from Britain just summed this up. Give a little love back to the world. I was surprised that it didn't win, because the lyrics, at least, would touch many a human chord. Look after the handicapped. Free the oppressed. But many feel that doing that for individuals is not a big enough cause. What we need is to change the structures of society. We need not just welfare, but political change if we are going to bring the human race into the life it should have. And so we have many political isms, of which I pick out two. The two we're most familiar with in this country. There is capitalism, which says that if we're going to live the full life, we need to stimulate production. We need to capture the profit motive. We need to introduce the competitive spirit. We need to encourage individual initiative to produce the wealth that will make us all happy. At the opposite end, we have socialism, which says it's not the production of wealth that is the problem, but the distribution of it. And what we need is more control by the state to see that the wealth that is created is more equally shared out, from each according to his ability and to each according to his need. To my mind, both of these isms are totally naive about human nature. They seem to believe that human nature is basically good. Capitalism believes that once we've created the wealth, we'll all be giving it away to the needy, which doesn't seem to happen. And socialism believes that if we're all working for the state, or working therefore for the people, then we shall have more motivation to work than ever before. It's naive. What I saw in the Eastern Europe bloc tells me that that kills initiative dead. See, both isms think that human nature is basically good. If we change the structures, change the system, everything will work perfectly. That is not the truth. Jesus, who said, "I am the truth," also said that he would not put his trust in any man because he knew what was in man. And it was he who said, "If you then, being evil, know how to give good things to your children," being evil, that's the truth about yourself. And you find it out when you get to know the truth, who is Jesus. Two more and then we're through. There is humanism. Humanism basically is the deification of man. I seem to go in for university debates, and one other debate I had was in a university not far from here. It was a debate on humanism versus Christianity. And my opponent there was a professor of education, an atheist Jew, and a very clever man. And he spoke first, and while he was speaking, I thought, help, I can't match that. He was brilliant. But he finished his talk with these words. He said, "So you can see that I, as a humanist, believe that man can solve all his own problems. And if he can't, then God help us." And the place erupted. The students cheered and laughed. And I just got up and said my text to the last three words of the previous speaker, God help us. Humanists believe that man has come of age, that he's grown up, that he no longer needs gods out there, he no longer needs heavenly help. Man is now able to solve his own problems. He is perfectly capable of doing so if he gives himself to the task. We have within us all that we need to get ourselves out of all our troubles. That's humanism. Very common belief. Again, it believes that human nature is basically good, and that we have within us the power to make this world a perfect place to live in. I believe it's naive, but it's a man-centered culture. And now it's taking on a religious form. I'm sure you've heard of the New Age movement. I'm not going to go into it in detail now, but at the heart of the New Age movement is the deification of man. That you are God yourself. And if you'd only realize that and practice it, you'd find you can be God in the universe. And it's taking many forms at the moment. It's basically humanism in a different dress. And finally, secularism, which I've called the privatization of religion. What do I mean by that? It's an outlook that says religion is purely a private, personal affair and must not be allowed to intrude into public life. And so our public life is becoming more and more secular, which means more and more divorced from religion. I was reading a list the other day of the most godless societies in the world. And you may be shattered to know that out of 250 nations, Japan was considered the most godless, the most secular, the most irreligious. But second out of 250 was the United Kingdom. We are the second most materialist, godless, secular society in the whole world. With all the church and chapel buildings scattered around, we are still the second most godless. We are becoming a secular society in which more and more of public life is unrelated to any religious aspect, in which the spiritual dimension, if you want to have it, then keep it as a personal hobby. Don't bring it into public life. Don't let it affect industry or politics or entertainment or sport. And we're beginning to see the results of a secularist outlook. I'm disturbed that even Christians are using that word in the wrong way. I talk to Christians and they say, I'm in a secular job. What do they mean by that? There is nothing secular except sin to the Christian. And whatever your job, housewife, taxi driver, farmer, whatever, that's your sacred calling. Unless you are doing it in a way that is totally unrelated to God. But we live in a society that is increasingly influenced by secularism that says, don't bring religion into public life. Keep it private. Keep it personal. Now, I've just looked at some of these isms, but when I listed them, I thought of Jesus. He didn't have sex. He didn't have money. Had hardly any leisure. He never did his own thing, only did his Father's will. He didn't seem to do much about protecting nature. He destroyed 2,000 pigs to save one man's sanity. He cursed a fig tree when he didn't find any fruit on it. He did feed the hungry on 2 occasions, but he didn't open any soup kitchens or hospitals or schools or clinics. He didn't tell industry what to do. He paid his poll tax, though he actually sent Peter fishing for it. He refused to join the freedom fighters to change the political structures. They were called zealots in those days. We would call them terrorists now. He wouldn't trust any man. He said that love of neighbor must come second to love of God. And above all, he put God at the center of his life. He was the opposite almost of all those things. And yet he said, I am the life. Now, I think I've shown you in these first 2 talks that to say Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life in our modern world is an offensive thing. So we have to ask now, by what right do we say these things? What grounds have we for claiming such incredible things about our Lord Jesus Christ? In the next 4 talks, we're going to look at Jesus, and we're going to study his life and ask what was unique about him, so unique that we can say these things.